Tender anyway. Okay.
Well, that's both of us.
I just hit the live button, so we should be live in about three, two, one. I think we are live. Welcome to
Oh,
Conversations with Catholics, episode like whatever this is, but most importantly, episode 4 of us together, right, Dan? 4?
yes, this is four.
Nice.
So,
Good.
so is this,
4 of
so have,
40,
have,
importantly,
so
because
am I now the champion?
yes, you've been the champion since number 3.
Oh,
So
okay.
you're not only the and thank you, Sophia. Not only are you the champion,
Oh,
but you are
that's
the
my, that's my, that's one of my Instagram friends.
oh good.
I just got real brave here and I threw up a little notice in my live stories on my Instagram. And so Sophia is an art teacher from, I think, oh gosh, I don't
We
know,
don't have to dox her too much,
Europe,
but
somewhere, an art teacher in Europe,
cool.
Spain or Italy. Um, uh, so I don't know, maybe a couple of my
You have
Instagram
fans.
friends will pop in tonight.
Good.
So good to have you all here.
Good.
And so
Um,
let me know if any of our usual crowd pops in.
from Costa Rica, she says. From Costa
Oh,
Rica.
Costa Rica. Okay. Okay. You know, you have these, always have these, you imagine where people are from and you're not even close.
Yeah. And that's the thing about the internet too, right? Like you're friends with people that you have no idea where they live. Sometimes you don't even know what
Yes.
they sound like. If you've only ever spoken to somebody over text, you don't even know what their voice sounds like. So
Right.
that's the funny thing about the
Right.
internet.
Right.
Um,
So I guess let's jump into it.
yes.
Uh,
So, and I'm only just running this past Daniel kind of right now. So I'm catching Daniel a little bit off guard here. But I just finished, and I'm going to hold this up for the camera. This book, Eucharist, by Bishop Robert Barron. We both have it. Um,
yes.
And all that I did was I highlighted a couple of things that stuck out to me as, ooh, you know what? I should really talk to Daniel about this. So I went ahead and I highlighted some of those things. A few of them, like 2 of them, have like nothing at all to do with the Eucharist. I just kind of thought that they were cool and they really spoke to me, and I wanted just to highlight them.
Sure.
But I think that I kind of want to start at the end, if that's okay.
Oh, that's my favorite part. Yes.
That's why I'm jumping into it. So, the way that Bishop Barron structures the book is it's really only 3 chapters. The first chapter is the Eucharist as a sacred meal. The second chapter is the Eucharist as a sacrifice. And then the last chapter is called If It's a Symbol, to Hell with It. And when I was reading the table of contents before I started this book, I knew that chapter 3 was going to be the chapter that interested me the most. And I must have been granted some kind of prophetic vision because I was correct. Chapter 3 was the chapter that interested me the most.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and there's a couple things in here that I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, Daniel. Um, the first of
Right.
which is the chapter starts with a reference to Flannery O'Connor. And I don't use my real last name on YouTube just for making
Yeah.
just making it easier for my family to avoid me because I'm sure they don't want to listen to my rambling. But my last name is
Same
O'Connor. Yep. Um,
for the
and
initiate.
so it did start with some Flannery O'Connor. What's up, Rosemary? We've got Rosemary here.
Oh, good.
Um, okay.
Hi, Rosemary. So good to have you on.
So the chapter starts with Bishop Barron talking about Flannery O'Connor and her reflection. So he says, O'Connor's bon mot reflects what the Catholic Church speaks of in its doctrinal statements as the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. That's Bishop Barron's way of setting up kind of what this whole chapter is about. But then he goes on to talk about what the real presence actually means. So he spends a few pages talking about the patristic consensus of the real presence. I am 100% on board that the patristics were on board with the real presence. But what I thought was more interesting was starting on page 84, Bishop Barron says the patristic consensus on the real presence emerged over the course of several centuries, but never during this period did the masters of Christian thought endeavor to explain the how of the Eucharistic change. And the how of the Eucharistic change has kind of been like, for whatever reason, like a fairly big focus on my channel. Like, and I don't know how that happened, but it just kind of did. But so this part really spoke to me. The bishop goes on, but during the Carolingian period, when Christianity's intellectual center of gravity shifted to north and west, theologians began to pose more technical questions about the Eucharist and attempt to state, in more philosophically adequate language, what happens when Christ becomes really present in the elements at Mass. Some scholars in recent years have bemoaned this development, seeing it into a descent into a fussy physicalism, and have called consequently for a return to the more poetic and lyrical approach of the Bible and the Fathers. Bishop Barron goes on to call this a mistake, and then he explains why. But I want to just kind of quickly put a bookmark in it right there, and kind of just, some scholars in recent years have bemoaned this development referring to the attempt to describe the how of the real presence. And also, Nick's here. What's up, Nick's?
Oh, Nick's, yes.
Yeah, he's always around.
The gang's all here.
Gang's all here. But so I have to admit, Daniel, I want to share with you my reaction reading that sentence, and then I want to see if you had a similar reaction or not. But I was reading that, and I'm like, yeah, like, bemoan that. Like, good job, recent theologians. And then I read the next sentence, and Bishop Barron is like, well, hold on, maybe they shouldn't be bemoaning this so much. So I was like, yes. Oh, no. What was your kind of reaction to that whole section?
Well, so you know what a great fan of Bishop Barron I am, and so there are many, and I've made the point when we've talked before that, Bishop Barron has sort of, he's a multifaceted individual. He's a very complex figure. Now how would we say, the great, the great virtue of Bishop Barron, what his great strength is distilling his vast learning in down to a very pastoral friendly approach. So that's that's what I admire very greatly about Bishop Barron is how he takes this vast learning and distills it down to this very, very digestible pastoral approach. So whenever I'm reading Barron, I sort of am, I'm always looking for, I guess I'm more edified or entertained, or the things that speak to me are the, more, deep theological presentations, so I'm always kind of looking for that kernel when Barron's talking of, where's he really coming from, and what is he saying that is, on a more theological, scholarly kind of end of the spectrum, or and when is he's speaking in a more edifying way. So I have this, so I apply to, I guess I call what my reading of Barron I sort of use this I guess it's a hermeneutic of wisdom and simplicity, to be
And
You know, you know, when Jesus is in that one place where he talks about how we need to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. You know, that to me is what Baron is. So what I'm so that's a long way of saying that I would contextualize
and
this, you know,
just
this
just to
statement within the whole context of this chapter.
and just to back you up, so if you take a look at this, you can see that I'm holding roughly 2/3 of the book in my left hand and roughly 1/3 of the book in my right hand. 2/3 of the book does exactly what you just outlined right there. This kind of and I know you know this, Daniel. I'm kind of saying this for the audience. Bishop Barron spends most of his time in this book doing exactly what Daniel was just talking about. Um, uh, Using like a pastoral kind of approach to explaining well, I guess so, explaining the Eucharist as a sacrifice and the Eucharist as a meal in poetic language, which I when I was reading that, I thought it was really like cool to see the oh, how do I want to phrase this? Cool to see the literary allusions, maybe? Like I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but my engineer brain was already honed in on chapter 3, if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah, because this is the hot button. Yeah, this is right here is all the is all that technical theological aspect. Well, and the whole thing is quite theological, but you're right. It is presented in a very reader friendly pastoral way. But he but you know Bishop Barron is always dropping these little nuggets to if you don't know, you know, if you're not versed in Bishop Barron's background, all you know, there's always these little nuggets that he drops that let you know that he's got some serious learning behind him.
And Daniel, I don't know if you can read it, but Nick says, "Kevin, you better be nice to my boy Barron."
Yeah,
I am. I'm a fan. I really am a fan of Bishop Barron. And maybe I didn't express what I just said there very clearly. When I said that, like, I thought it was cool, but I kind of was looking forward to chapter 3. That was not any kind of knock on Barron. That was me admitting my own brutishness when it comes to so my favorite. Yeah, you know what I mean.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So you were saying about you were just saying your favorite.
Like my favorite books are like sci-fi and fantasy books. But even the fantasy, my favorite fantasy books are the like where magic is kind of just almost another kind of science. You know what I mean? Because that's just how my brain works. So when I saw that this book was going to be very like allegorical for the first 2 chapters, but then the third book was going to be up my alley a little bit more, that's what kind of piqued my interest. And that's not a knock on Bishop Barron at all. That is a knock on myself and my, you know, the brain of somebody who just probably can't fully appreciate all of the points that Barron's trying to make in chapters 1 and 2, but then can really dig into it with Bishop Barron in chapter 3. If you know, so not at all the fault of Barron. This is the fault of Kevin.
So I guess, you know, and the thing that we've, you know, kind of gone back and forth in previous talks on is just essentially the whole problem, if you will, of transubstantiation from you know what your problems are with it, and then you know, I've shared sort of my ideas about you know what the real presence is. So maybe we should just reiterate the distinction that I make, and I think you see the distinction in the book too, and it's sort of a technical distinction between, let's say, the Eucharist, real presence, and transubstantiation. So
Yes.
very often we use um, real presence and transubstantiation as synonyms. They're standard. We use them and we mean the same thing, but they are not at all exactly the same thing. So sometimes I have chimed in your comments in the past, and I've sort of inartfully said, well, real presence is the dogma and transubstantiation is just the explanation. And that's probably, oh, Anton.
Yeah, Anton saying
Hey,
hi. What's up, Anton? I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
good to have you. No, 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 I'm glad to see who all's here. But so I guess, you know, when we say what is and is not a dogma, that becomes sort of squishy language
Mm-hmm.
because, certainly, people do, people do refer to transubstantiation as a dogma. And I think even in Mysterium Fidei, it it mentions transubstantiation as the dogma. And Barron gets into that in this chapter of the book where he's talking about how sort of in that Vatican II era period, um, much of the Catholic world, certainly the Vatican, the voices of Vatican II, Rahner, Skilevix, were the big ones. Were starting to they were starting to, I guess, identify exactly what Barron's talking about here. That in the 20th, I guess at that time, the 20th century, that this neo-scholastic language that defined transubstantiation is maybe it maybe it in some way doesn't speak to our modern world. And um, so then what I think that this passage you just read from Barron, it's like, okay, well then, so these scholars, people like Skilevix, Rahner came in and they proposed the transsignification and transfinalization, and they were sort of that was sort of maybe it. I think the perception was that was squashed.
So
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
he
just
yeah he
on
totally
page
gets into
99. I
that.
highlighted the and I need to read it to transfigure. What was it? Transsignification
Transsignification and
and transfinalization.
transfinalization.
I highlighted that exact. So as soon as you said that, I'm like, oh, yep, I know I have that highlighted. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you again. I keep doing that.
Yeah. So Skilevix, Rahner, they were, I guess, they were two of the ones who were championing that kind of new way of thinking about the real presence. And but so in Mysterium Fidei, the way I read it, and I think the way Barron reads it here, is that Paul VI was mostly saying not that transsignification and transfinalization are 100% uh, heretical views, let's say, but that they do not totally replace. They are not adequate replacements for transubstantiation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what Barron was starting to get at in the passage that you read. So where I'm at on, I guess what my thoughts, just to drop my own thoughts in here, and I think you know, I don't think Barron and I are too far off. I think I'm
From what I can
pretty
tell, I
close
think you're
to,
right.
I think I'm pretty close, and naturally, you know, I'm not even worthy to carry,
No, no,
you
no.
know.
Baron got it from you. Is what I'm hearing.
I was only, I want, I an old video of a very young Baron popped up on my YouTube stream just this week, and it was from 2002.
Wow. Was he bishop in 2002?
Oh gosh, no, he's very recently a bishop.
Yeah.
He's very, very recently a bishop. So, um, he first kind of made a splash. I think he did a PBS series that kind of went, I guess, viral before going viral was a thing. Uh, but that would have been, I think it was after I joined the church in 2005, because I had no idea about, he was not a widely known figure in 2005. This is back when it was, Scott Hahn was the huge voice in 2005.
Scott Hahn on
Uh,
cassette tape.
oh yes, yes. I think I have Scott Hahn on CD or something. I went to see Scott Hahn live
Oh, no way.
once or twice, so I've shaken the great man's hand.
Oh, that's
Um,
kind of cool.
uh, but Barron kind of splashed on the scene a little bit after that, because when I first came into the church, um, I went through the RCIA process, but then I had so much fun going through RCIA that I sort of became part of the support team for the next year or two. I forget if it was 1 year or 2 years that I kept going to the RCIA just to kind of be there as moral support. Um, and we had still not. I don't think even then that his series had come out, because I remember when the series came out, and you know, and even at that time, I was much more. I was much more in the in the more Catholic Answers uh, wing of things at that. I was very much in that EWTN Catholic Answers sort of spectrum, where when I first became aware of Barron, I almost thought he was one of these. I thought, oh gosh, here's one of these liberal
Yeah.
Catholics doing his thing, and then my horizons broadened from that time to where now I would very much align myself with, for me now, Barron is that, I think of Barron as this very sensible center of things. And and he's kind of you know I think he's sort of morphed into that, where the general Catholic community sees him as a very central, kind of the gold standard of what it is to be a faithful Catholic. But the spectrum goes, both ways, you know, very much, very much into the progressive territory from where Barron is, and then very, very much into the conservative territory from where he is. So I've been on all, I've been sort of, I've occupied all of those places on that spectrum. And,
You know what's funny for me is that
mhm.
my opinion of Bishop Barron has only gone up over time, despite the fact that my like how many people would call me Catholic has probably only decreased over time. But yet my admiration for Barron has only increased over time. And I think that's likely because of the kind of the type of Catholic that I was, right? Like being like, very trad. I remember
Yeah.
Probably 2000 16 and 17 and stuff like that, where I was very religious in like 2016, 2017. And I remember only ever hearing Bishop Barron's name alongside other like modernists. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I never had a high opinion of him until I, so, you know, the number of people calling me Catholic has decreased over time, but my respect for Bishop Barron has increased over time. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yes. Well, so, you dropped a video earlier this week where I think for the first time I heard you say that you were speaking as a Catholic in the video, and I was like, oh, hooray, because I do think of you as a Catholic, and the way I would describe you is as a non-practicing Catholic. And I
And
think that's about as accurate a description as one can.
I
I mean, that's
I,
about as accurate as you can be.
I agree. Um, but I don't say it often. And why don't I say it often? Because it upsets people. It upsets people when I do. Um, some people have like a really rigid definition of what it means to be a Catholic, and
Yeah. So here's okay. So this is where I don't understand this gatekeeper mentality, where I, for me, I want there to be, I want there to be Catholics. Like, I want there to be as many people in the Catholic Church as there can be. Okay. So I think the world's a better place when there are more Catholics. And so, and we have a broad spectrum of Catholics in the church. And we can't just say we're only going to be the church of this one very narrow band of Catholics, wherever you might want to be. So if I want to say, well, I'm a Bishop Barron Catholic, but I don't want any of those James Martin Catholics in the church, or I don't want any of those, you know, uh, our good friends on the, I don't want any of those Taylor Marshall Catholics in the church. Well, no, I want to hear, I want all those voices in the church, and I myself have been, you know, you could have pegged me as anyone, you could peg me at various times in my life and in my time in the churches, you know, any one of those spots. Um, so, uh, so I'm happy for there to be Catholics who have some, some engagement with the faith. So there's, why I say, why I think of you as Catholic, and even I guess say actively Catholic in your interests,
yes,
although not so,
good way to put it.
although not right. So non-practicing for various reasons, but still actively participating in the affairs of the church in your own way. And if that's where you are right now, then I say, Godspeed. And, and I only pray that someday, maybe the day will come when you'll be inspired to be practicing again, and we would all rejoice. But, we have other great, there's tons of figures in the world who are, what we would maybe call Catholic friendly voices who are not practicing. Just recently, there was that group of, I guess, filmmakers that went to the Vatican, and Scorsese, Martin Scorsese goes to the Vatican, and there's a guy that was absolutely demonized by many in the religious sphere, when The Last Temptation came out, that was, I'm an old guy, so I lived through that period, and what a great scandal it was when that film came out. And it's not not a by no means a like a orthodox Catholic message in the film. It's definitely got its own creative take on some matters. But one of the things that he sort of came out in the little brief conversation with Francis and Scorsese was how his Catholicism has inspired his films,
Mm-hmm.
and how, and and he's an older man now, and you sort of get this impression that his Catholicism is even becoming more meaningful to him, um, in recent years. And then he made that other film recently, and I haven't seen it. I need to look it up. I think I tried to find it on my one of my streaming services, and it just wasn't available yet. So I'm waiting for it to become available. But it had to, it was about the Jesuits, and
Oh,
he
the one, Silence, right? Was that Scorsese?
silent,
Silence.
right, silent,
Yep.
and
Andrew
and
Garfield.
and James Martin consulted on that.
Oh, I didn't
Um,
know that James Martin consulted on that one.
yeah,
Huh.
yeah, yeah. So his interests have sort of, become more. I suppose he's drifted a little more to, a more central place. If you were to say, in the Catholic world, maybe a less, he's sort of come to a maybe a less controversial place, where
Yeah.
his films aren't trying to be as, um, you know, and not that, and I think he's always, made very sincere attempts, in his, and that's one of the things, that also came out with this group of artists, that met at the Vatican this week, and some of them are just, other, even more scandalous people than um
And you know what I'll say about that is, it is my opinion, and so take this for whatever it's worth, but it's my opinion that the types of Catholics who we might describe as Catholic Answers Catholics, and then definitely the Taylor Marshall Catholics, they seek to exclude, all of the group that I'm going to call the cultural Catholics, which is, in my opinion, a shame. And I think I've said this a few times, but I look with envy at my Hindu friends, because my Hindu friends participate fully in the religion of their people without having to really, like, they don't have to, like, it's far more of a culture that I think than it is a religion. And I don't know if it's exactly the same with Catholicism. I wouldn't say it's more of a culture than a religion, but I think it's a shame that the culture part of it is almost like looked down upon, by certain Catholic groups. Like, they almost want to make it where it's 100% religion, 0% culture, I think, for some folks. Obviously not for everybody. And
right.
I think that's a shame.
Right. And I think yes. So what I would say then is, so I have an appreciation for the devout Catholic world. And I am a practicing Catholic. Okay. And I consider myself, while not overly pious, I do consider myself, I would describe myself as devout. So I would describe myself as a serious Catholic, a devout Catholic, maybe not an overly pious Catholic, but we're all works in progress. So working on my piety in the meantime. But so kudos to the pious, devout, um, all, that whole world of Catholics.
And
Get that. Yeah, let's get this comment here.
yeah, Anton says, so as someone whose practice of Catholicism is radically imperfect amidst a culture of perfectionism, I definitely agree with your envy of Hindu friends.
Yeah. Do I know Anton? Because I everyone hides behind their names. I hide behind my name. So
Anton comments on a lot of my videos. I think he
not
probably commented on our conversations in the past. Um,
But
Anton is very
Anton has
insightful.
not been a guest.
No, not yet, but maybe one
Well,
day.
come on, Anton.
But always insightful. And I like this comment too, because Daniel, you may not have picked up on this, but the video that I did about pride and being like the seven deadly sins, we were talking about how, and I think that you left a comment even stating your agreement,
Yeah,
saying
yeah,
that
you were.
the pride that people talk about in reference to Pride Month is not the same as the capital sin of pride, which I think is probably better stated as arrogance. I think that's probably a better way to state the capital sin. And so Anton says, of course, your envy, because my envy of Hinduism is not a capital sin. Thank you, Anton. I
Oh, deep,
appreciate
yeah,
that.
deep cut there,
That's
deep
funny. Yeah,
cut.
I
Oh,
appreciated that. I
wow.
appreciated that. That was good.
Oh, wow.
Call back.
Yeah, yeah, that's a whole nother rabbit trail we could go down. But I thought I did think you hit it right in your video.
Snaps for Daniel.
What do we,
Anton
can I
says,
move my, oh, hold on. I'm going to
"Can you
move
see
my
it?"
little, I had to move my little thing on my
Oh,
screen so I can
okay.
read the oh, thank you so much.
And that's why I was giving snaps for Daniel because I
Yeah.
agree.
Well, yeah, more Catholic leaders. So yeah, so I'm just certainly a lay person. I'm not anything. I'm not a theologian. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not a religious. I'm nothing. I'm just a Catholic guy talking my crazy Catholic talk,
Let's
just
call you a
talking out
lay
of my head.
theologian. You're a lay theologian.
A wannabe lay
Okay,
theologian.
okay, all right.
Yeah. But just with what he said there, I just happened um, the video. Father Casey just dropped a video just a few hours ago today, and I took a little nap before I came on, so I'd be as bright eyed and bushy tailed as I could be. But just when I woke up from my nap, I saw Father Casey's video, and it was um, it was like what Catholic spirituality are you was the title of it or something to that effect. And he went through like maybe five or six orders, like the Franciscans, the Jesuits, the Carmelites, the um, um, Dominicans, Opus Dei, just the big ones. And he shared some of the prominent figures within each group. And when he came to when he was talking about the Franciscans, he talked about all the ones, but then he he uh, he dropped Richard Rohr on his list. He name dropped Richard Rohr, and also um, a really wild voice, Iliadilio. He dropped Iliadilio on his list.
I don't know if
And
I'm familiar with that one, with that name.
yeah, yeah, just if you want a wild ride, just
Buckle up
you
and
yeah, to tune it for a real wild ride. Look at her little her little bios. She had a really fun talk. It's on YouTube. Something about butterfly. I haven't seen it. It's been so long since I saw it, but it's her whole evolution from her entrance into the her religious order as a young sister in the Vatican II days, and then where she was a habit where a traditional habited nun, and then um she fell in with some of the more shall we say Vatican II inspired sisters, the ones who
we
were
use that phrase a lot around here, don't we?
the sweatshirt sisters, um, although that's maybe a little unfair, that because you can always tell it. A sister always has some kind of a habit. It's not that traditional Batman habit, but it's there's a sort of code of dress that they abide by, that you can see that they're sisters anyway. But she fell in with the more of the sweatshirt sister crowd, and she was, anyway, it just goes through her whole evolution. But she's a brilliant um, scholar. She's more of a scholar than a religious. But anyway,
I
so
looked
Father
her up,
Casey,
and
yeah,
I looked her up, and so her Wikipedia article is Ilia Delio, OSF, PhD. So
yeah,
clearly she knows what she's talking about. And I just want to also point out that I like her already because she's from Newark, New Jersey. And I'm not from Newark, but I went to school. I attended college in Newark. And like Newark was like the city that I lived right outside of. So I could get into Newark in like 20, 25 minutes. So
yeah,
I like her already.
yeah. So she's definitely someone that, if some of the if some of our gatekeeping friends who go after Father Casey, um well, I don't, Ilia Delio is gonna blow their
Good.
heads right off there.
Good. Um, I brought up Anton's next comment only because your comment about uh, blowing up the gatekeeping kind of so Anton put this in the chat like a few minutes ago, but this what you just said about blowing up the gatekeeping. So Anton says, I think one of the big gaps that we have to bridge is the ivory tower of clerical theology with the experiences of everyday people. So there's a divide between the ivory tower and the everyday experience. Could theology be reformed starting from the bottom up? And you were kind of heading in that direction anyway, I think, Daniel.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's the real project of Vatican II. You know, um, a book I've been having fun with recently is this tome.
It's a big one.
Yeah,
Congar.
yeah, Yves Congar, My Journal of the Council, and I heard Father Bear, of course, Father Barron uh, commented that he was reading that book, and I imagined it was some little journal looking book. Uh, so I thought, oh, I'd like to check that out because it sounded fun. And this giant tome arrives, and I thought, oh wow! But it's just all. I mean, it's a little. It's just literally these very short little snippet entries that he gives of being at the council, and one of the things he says in there is, you know, he kind of bemoans the sort of that neo-scholastic mindset at the time, that the way he says it, something, he says, oh, so and so, they are an expert at quoting Denzinger, like, there's a point where theology can just be minimalized to this sort of tautological approach to what our established dogmas are. So it's just like just this rehearsal of our standard, just unless we're just rehearsing our standard dogmas
Like
over.
checking a
There's no,
box almost.
yeah, there's no there in some ways it stifles creative thinking. And so that's where Congar was at. And one thing I found fun in there, in in our last talk, we were talking about Vatican II, and I said something about um, questioning, on the fly there. I said, was Barth at the Protestant theologian Karl Barth? I said, was Barth at Vatican II or not? And uh, so he wasn't in any formal way, but so I Googled it, and you can't find anything. You can Google, there's things you can't Google. This is one of my great fascinations, is things you can't Google. So I tried to Google, is Barth, well, no, but in Congar's diary, Barth did pop in.
You found
He
it.
pop,
Not in Google, but you found it.
yeah, Barth did just stop by for a little side room meeting with Ronner, Congar, um, a few other guys were there, but Barth did drop into town just to give his 2 cents. And it was largely Bart was warning about this great fascination in the Catholic world at that time with Rudolf Bultmann. Um, and it's interesting in Congar's diary how what a massive presence Bultmann was in in much of the Catholic world at this time. Which even to this day, you're not gonna read a Ratzinger book without some reference to Bultmann, not in an endorsing way, but just dealing with you know the great presence that Bultmann was. But there was a fear, I guess there was a fear at Vatican II that this Bultmannian thinking was going to sabotage the church, which even with Karl Barth, there was his fear was Bultmannian thinking was sabotaging the Protestant world. And I guess Bultmann is sort of that one of the early voices that maybe led to this mythicist kind of approach that we had that it has manifested today. Just that it's that liberal Protestant stripping away all of the miraculous, and but doing so, I would say, why people speak respectfully of Bultmann is that he did it in a way that respected the message of Jesus. He wasn't taking, like a, let's say like he wasn't like the Bart Ehrman of his day, let's say.
Right.
You know.
Maybe he was Thomas Jefferson, because do you know about the Jefferson Bible?
Yeah.
And
He was not even right, and he would not even be as deistically inclined as Jefferson.
Okay.
So Bultmann, I think, would still be Orthodox, an Orthodox Lutheran, and still have his own, affirming of the creeds and the Trinity.
Yeah. I mean, and if you listen to what Jefferson actually said about the teachings of Jesus, he called him something like the most sublime teacher in like the world has ever seen, or something like that. So Jefferson clearly had like a great deal of respect for the teachings of like Jesus of Nazareth.
Well, yes, but now to bring this now, what would Bishop Barron say about that? Well, okay, but we can't minimize Jesus to just another brilliant world teacher, right? That would be where Jefferson would depart from what we
Yes.
would call the Orthodox
Yes.
Catholic or Orthodox Christian
Yeah.
view. But everyone is on their own path, so um, so I guess we don't want to, we don't want to demonize anyone. And and many scholars make some really good contributions to just the general body of thought, and that's something, that's another thing that comes out. That's another thing that comes out in Barron's book. So did you catch the Raymond Brown reference?
If I did, I didn't highlight it, but
It was very brief. It
yeah.
was
Do you remember where it was?
he's in the biblio.
Let me
He's
see
in
if I
the
can find
biblio. Well,
it.
he's even in the index if you look it up. And it's just it's just a little like kind of a quiet shout out to Raymond Brown. It wasn't any one of his groundbreaking idea.
It's on
Page 20,
page
well,
27.
27 and 77 he does. But it's just and it wasn't, I don't even remember so much the reference as much as there was a reference. That it was more that he dropped the name than what there was. I didn't see a huge profundity in what he attributed to him, but it was just like it was that name drop, just as maybe a little soft appeal to say, I'm not an enemy of people like Raymond Brown. Just saying,
And I'm a
right?
huge Raymond Brown fan. I'm a huge Raymond Brown fan. So I actually didn't.
Yes.
I didn't. I don't think I remember like reading that. So, and just for the audience, I'm going to read from page 27. This is it. This is the entire reference to Raymond Brown that Bishop Barron makes. Let us examine just a few instances of this meal fellowship in the New Testament, beginning in perhaps a surprising place, the story of Christmas. The account of Jesus' birth in the Gospel of Luke is not, as Raymond E. Brown reminds us, an innocent tale that we tell to children. Instead, and then he keeps going, and that's it. So he doesn't actually quote Raymond Brown directly on
Yeah,
page
so that's
27.
that, right. So that is that barren iceberg style,
Yes.
right? Where this very innocuous little passing, the account of Jesus' birth in the Gospel of Luke is not, as Raymond Brown reminds us, an innocent tale that we tell children. Now, okay, now, now let's read Raymond Brown and see what sort of his higher critical approach to the Christmas story might be, right? And but so what I how the way I read Barron, what I read Barron saying there is that we we would fall short in just having this innocent story of the birth narratives without plumbing the depths of their great theological import.
Yeah.
So that is Barron saying, okay, yes, we read narrative as narrative, but what we get from narrative is the is this great, theological intent that it is presenting.
I have a question for you as the world's leading Barron expert. Okay. Um, so
I'd like to get a real Barron expert on with so if you have enough friends now, like talk to your boy Swan Sona, okay, who talked with Matthew Levering, and see if you have connections to get
okay,
Matthew Levering on with you, okay?
I'll do it. I'll do it. I will. But
Because he's a because
I do have a question for
because
you though.
Barron quotes Levering in this Eucharist book. I mean, Levering is someone that
Oh,
is in.
okay.
Oh, but Levering talked to Swan. So I'm saying you talk to Swan. Swan talked to Levering. Levering is on Barron's inside circle, and Levering does podcasts. Levering goes on with Larry Chapp, who I'm a big Larry Chapp fan. So okay, so go. I'm interrupting you again.
So
Our whole conversation is becoming mutually
that
sabotaged,
that's
as it always does.
it's supposed to. That's a sign of a good conversation. But here's my question for you. So one of my favorite things about Father Raymond E. Brown is that he's not afraid to kind of lean into, and I want to be careful with how I say this, but to like lean into narrative. Father Raymond E. Brown, if he's passed, so he can't defend himself anymore, but I'm going to say that he's the kind of person who will compare the infancy narrative in Matthew, the infancy narrative in Luke, look at them, see that they don't, perfectly line up with each other. And instead of doing the kind of apologetic move where you're like, well, let me layer them on top of each other and make sure, he instead says, no. Let's look at the narrative and see what kind of meaning we can derive from this, because that's what matters way more than the historicity of the birth narratives. And
Yes.
that even got him in trouble in the day, because at one point, and I forget exactly where he said this, but somebody said to him, like, well, what about like the perpetual virginity of Mary? Like, is that also part of the narrative? And he said something like, I don't know, like he seemed pretty non-committal. Like he didn't go, like he didn't take the obvious Catholic priest route of being like, well, no, Mary was definitely a virgin. He was kind of like leaving it open. He's like, well, maybe she was, but also maybe that's just kind of like part of the narrative of the story. Like maybe. And that kind of got him in a little bit of trouble.
Right.
So
But
my question,
so who else speaks about narrative in this same way, maybe not as explicitly as Raymond Brown, is Joseph Ratzinger, who wrote these beautiful books, which, um, you know, the Jesus of Nazareth series. Um, uh, he distinguishes in the Holy Week book. I missed out on the infancy narrative book for some strange reason. I have two of the three, but so as he's going through the Holy Week, um, the Passion narratives, he makes he makes a distinction between um, the appropriate phraseology just slipped my mind, but a creedal, but a, a a creedal statement and a narrative statement. So he distinguishes between what is when the church speaks. Gosh, if I could, I should. I will probably never
That looks like a
find
big
the
book.
page.
You might have a hard time finding it, but
Yeah, I won't. I won't find the page, but it's just speaking when we're speaking. Oh, a confessional statement is the phraseology.
and confessional
Um,
here means something that like you must believe. So like the perpetual virginity of Mary would be confessional.
yes, but in a confessional being how we speak, maybe how we speak theologically.
Okay.
Okay. So like yes, like Nicene Creed statements. Okay. So just like Raymond Brown um, is going to affirm the Nicene Creed, Raymond Brown is going to be saying mass and
Yeah.
reciting
Mm-hmm.
the creed and affirming the
Yep.
creed.
And he
But
died a Catholic priest in good standing, just for the audience
yes,
to know. So
absolutely. But then you know, he might have very nuanced statements about, what the resurrection is, for example.
mm-hmm.
Well, as does, Joseph Ratzinger. He's very explicit in saying in the Jesus of Nazareth book that, we are not speaking of a resuscitated corpse. We're uh no one saw this guy walk out of this tomb. Okay. We're not speaking about that. And in the God and this Gospel of Peter that has this fantastic tale about this guy heroically coming out of this tomb, the church said, yeah, no.
That's right.
Right. Like the church was like, yeah, we're not talking about that. Okay. But so yeah, anyway, so just that, another tangent we run off on. But so Barron has this little, gentle nod to a Raymond Brown. And and he makes a lot of, there's a lot that was one of the things that I sort of made mental notes as I was going through this book, that the other fella, he gives a nice nod to. And it's another quote that is, there's nothing groundbreaking. It's like I'm reading this thinking, why did he, why did he even why did he shout out this guy for like just some little statement in passing that did not need a citation? But it's like, it's kind of an ecumenical gesture. So he gives these so he shouts out NT Wright uh, a couple of times in the book. And I read that, I say, well, that was an ecumenical gesture.
Yes. Yeah.
And there were several other places, but then
C.S. Lewis, right? I seem to remember him calling
yeah,
C.S. Lewis out at one point in here.
yeah,
I
he
don't.
did another one of those little throw off, where he shouts out Lewis. And then but then some of the philosophers he would shout out, like he shouts out Wittgenstein in this passage we began with, right when it goes from his talk on transubstantiation into transsignification and transfinalization. he makes this little appeal to Wittgenstein for this idea of transfinalization. Like we need, like we're living in a post logical positivist world, okay? And so going back to transubstantiation, not to just jump all around, but you go
Full
back to
circle. We're
Trent,
not jumping around anywhere. We're going full circle here.
yeah, but going back to Trent, and and I'm, you know, I haven't done as deep a dive into Trent as I need to, but only because I think that so much of the church councils, I think I have received in their trickle down form. Um, so much of what I just this world I live and breathe in is Council of Trent stuff. Okay.
Yep.
But you go back to Council of Trent and you say, so what the 20th century theologians maybe found lacking in Trent, or their criticism of Trent, or where it falls short, is it doesn't fall short on its own terms, okay? It it's just we have to we have to keep up with the times with our
Yeah.
theology.
So
So
that brings me to
so
something
yeah,
that
yeah.
that I highlighted in here that I actually wanted to bring up, and I'm not going to find the quote in here, but something that struck me about what Bishop Barron was saying, I think specifically about Trent, unless he was talking about like Florence or something, because there was other councils where transubstantiation is discussed pretty heavily. But Barron says something to the effect of the way that the councils talk about it, it's kind of like it's already just like a conclusion, like just this is just how things work. So it's not so much that the councils are saying this is how it is. It's more like saying that the councils are saying real presence is how it is, and then we're just going to talk about it as if it's like as if transubstantiation is how the real presence happens. Why? Because that kind of language is just plain old in the milieu, but it's important not to mix up the two. And that was something that I thought
Yeah,
was
and that
interesting.
was right, and that was very much the way of speaking at the time. And
Yes.
uh, and the other thing to remember with the Council of Trent is it was a direct reply to the Reformation.
Yes.
So, which so much Christian dogma is a reply to some problem in the church. Like we wouldn't have the Trinity if we did not have Arius. If it had not been for the Arian controversy, we would not have any. Why would we bother ourselves with this whole
Yeah.
Trinity thing?
And
It was only when Arius comes along,
so
oh,
I'm
you've
sorry,
got
I did
something.
find it. It's on
What page?
page 89. Um, and on page 89, this is what Barron says. So he's talking about the word transubstantiation being used more and more commonly. First, it's used in 1202 by Pope Innocent III, but then eventually by the Fourth Lateran Council, uh, the term transubstantiation is employed, but again, in almost a casual, taken for granted matter.
Well, before it meant what it meant now, right? It was a we used the church introduced the word before we even meant what we mean by the word. Aquinas is the one that fleshed out
Yes.
the word we know today.
Yeah.
But it was just a convenient word that meant, in that world that, okay, this thing that we're these elements, the bread and the wine, they are no they have become the body and blood of Christ. And the best word we have to say what we're trying to get at here is they've been transubstantiated. But it was just a word. It had no technical meaning until Aquinas came along.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then of course it was questioned, obviously. And even Luther only varied just a hair's breadth from, and Luther started defend. Luther found himself in a position where he had to defend the real presence. Once Luther questioned the authority of the church, and then started the whole Protestant Reformation, and then the radical Reformationists started breaking off from Luther. They started questioning the real presence. Luther never abandoned the real presence.
Yep.
Luther only explained it in his own way, which people call, many people call that consubstantiation. But even if you get real technical about it, maybe that, maybe even Luther would say you're misunderstanding me. Um, and I'm not exactly saying consubstantiation. So uh so yeah, so the point with what we have to always keep in mind with Trent is that, you know, it was very long ago.
Yes.
I mean, let's see. Um, we didn't have, there was, I mean, Trent goes, I mean, we didn't even have Bach yet, did we?
No, I don't think so. In
We
fact, I
didn't
think
have
the printing press was only invented a little bit
we
before.
just barely get a printing press.
Right.
So someone who, I'm, you and I are musicians. So I always think when I'm thinking of like world history, I'm always thinking like, you know, pre these vast musical movements, right? So I'm thinking I think, okay, Bach. That was before, the way we would say before Christ, even,
Before Bach.
I was like, okay, that was before Bach. And I'm thinking
Before
that was like,
Chopin.
so that's before music. I mean,
Kinda.
that's like when we're just talking before they even knew what music was the way we know what music
Right.
is today.
Yeah.
I mean, chords and harmonies, and
Kinda
it was
didn't
just this,
exist.
it didn't exist.
Yeah.
It did so this is when Trent was taking place, okay? And so there was no Kant, there's no Descartes. uh I mean, lots of
Yeah.
lots of our kind of world, lots of thinking that just has trickled down into our current world view. It just hadn't happened yet. So so I guess, that's where I take a I am both, you know I both celebrate Trent and am affirmative of Trent, but also wanting to
Before Bach.
wanting to contextualize it. And
And it
you
would be
know
kind of crazy too if there was some kind of church that said, I refuse to update my views in light of literally hundreds of years of, human experience, furthering our collective wisdom. But that'd be
yes,
crazy. That'd be crazy, right?
yes, and then so much of it kind of trickles down into our thought, and we don't
Yes.
even know that we just get it. We embrace so many ideas that we have no idea what their origin is, because it's just in the soup right now.
Yes.
um
I've been reading a little bit of Ian Hacking recently, who was a Canadian
yeah,
philosopher. I think I'm getting his name right. He was a Canadian philosopher of science. Um,
maybe I don't know him.
I
Yeah,
think, and I think I'm getting his name right. Hacking. But and he was talking all about how a lot of the views of kind of like the Reformation are just our natural like starting points today without us even recognizing it, and that simply wasn't the case before the Enlightenment era. So he's yeah, he's talking like French Revolution era. So think about everything before the French Revolution. Like
yeah,
people
yeah,
thought radically different than we do because that was before Kant. That was before
yeah,
Descartes.
yeah. And so the French Revolution, that's a hot button Catholic subject there. I mean,
Yes, it is.
the whole the whole crisis that Vatican I was in effect responding to. And I was reading something from Skilevix, another little book from his thoughts on the council, an old book that is, I got some old like library copy from. It was as old as the book. It was not a book that was ever reprinted. It was put out in like the 60s, and I found an old dusty copy from the 60s. But he makes this I get, and maybe it's just the way I read it, because he makes this little passing reference to almost how, in his view, almost how he saw Vatican II as finally accomplishing the thing that was the thing that made necessary the French Revolution. In other words, it's like the happy fault. You know, I don't know if in the trad um, at the trad Easter or the trad Easter vigil, if they pray that opening prayer where they reference the happy fault of Adam, where they say, "Oh happy fault, oh truly
Oh
necessary."
yes.
Do they say that little thing
Um,
where it?
I think so because I've definitely heard that before. Now I will share with you that I was normally serving the Easter Vigil because like literally any altar boy who wanted to serve the Easter Vigil could. So I
Uh,
would just be like sitting there holding a candle, like, and so I'm probably less like I didn't have my missal in front of me for during the Easter Vigil for the most part.
so you were multitasking.
Well, was I multitasking or was I sitting there with a candle trying not to fall asleep because it's midnight? That's so. But
Yeah. Well, I'm a
that
night
does
owl,
sound familiar.
so the vigil is my like that's like my midnight mass and the vigil. Those are my big masses of the year.
I
But
did always like those. Like I liked it,
yeah,
even if I was tired. I did like it.
yeah. But it's this idea, this oh happy fault, oh truly necessary fault of Adam. And then it goes on to say that, you know, led to the whole problem that brought about the our, Christ our Messiah and this whole Paschal mystery, this whole drama. Um, but it's this idea of the necessary transgressive act. That's my phrase, the necessary transgressive act. But it's this common idea. It's the common popular idea of a youth um, passing through adolescence, where you know every child is taught how we must obey our parents, we must be obedient, but then there's this little there's always the little break that every adolescent, teenager, young adult has to make with his upbringing to strike out in the world on his own, and it always involves some just slightly transgressive behavior. Very rarely does anyone achieve anything in life. Even the great, even the great, the great men in our world. There's always some necessary transgressive act in
Pushing
their
of
in their
boundaries.
yes, it's the pushing of boundaries and maybe a bending of rules,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
to really break, almost any field that you want to break into, there's always that little you find you're in. And it's always this little bending of a rule or making of an exception or, you know. So I guess maybe Skillovix looks at the French Revolution in that sort of way as, okay, something was at a break, something was gonna bust here. And it manifested itself in this great tragic, event of history, which was incredible, which was bloody and tragic and maybe misdirected. But it was like we were at the world was at this breaking point, and that's what did it. And then, um, and then the church reacted massively, massively against the French Revolution. Well, naturally so, because of the great persecution. I mean, the many, you know, great persecution of the church that
I mean,
followed.
the
And
monarchy and the church were kind of,
oh
intertwined. So
yes,
the French Revolution wasn't only a overthrowing of a political institution. In some ways, it was an overthrowing of the Catholic Church.
yes, but the idea is that the world was at a place where it could no longer sustain
Mm-hmm.
itself. The whole thing was getting top heavy,
Mm-hmm.
and something had to break. And it's the old, would we go back to it? Is that the answer now in our modern world? Say, well, gee, we just need to go back to a pre-French Revolution. We need to can we just put the toothpaste back
in the tube,
There are some who think that we can put the toothpaste back in the
Oh,
tube.
What's Larry
So
saying?
Larry's saying that Anthony from there's I don't know if you're familiar with Return to
Oh,
Tradition, the Catholic
yeah.
YouTube channel. So if you can't tell by the title of the channel, it's a traditionalist
I
channel.
thought, I like Anthony's another one of those guys I like to watch just for, and actually, I want to say that I like the way Anthony presents on his channel. I think he does a real good job presenting
Me
his
too.
subject matter.
Me too. Me too.
And I would probably I would probably reach a different conclusion. I'm much more of a Pope Francis friendly Catholic. Um, but I respect. I want to say I respect Anthony. I respect the work that he does on that channel,
Uh,
even if
I
I
do.
disagree with
I
his
do too.
conclusions. I think
Yeah.
he does very good. I think, he's not like a frothing at the mouth. You know, he's presenting his information very, just it's a great. I like the way he presents. So I tune into him just to whenever I see something that I'm curious about in the news. I'm like, oh well, if his stuff pops up, I'll so yeah, I'm quite familiar. But yeah, yeah, what Larry said there.
And
Yeah, he would be the let's put the toothpaste back in the tube kind
yeah.
of guy.
And I do think it's important for everybody to expose yourself to people who disagree with you, like on the regular. And if I'm going to be exposing myself to
Yeah.
people who disagree with me on the regular, I think that the Return to Tradition channel is actually like a good way for me to expose myself to like things that I don't really agree with a whole lot, because I think that Anthony, like you said, presents it well. And then I also don't think that he presents it in like a particularly like some trads tend to do things in like a kind of belligerent and like aggressive kind of way, and
Yeah,
Anthony's does not do
yeah.
that. So
And do you pick up on what he always says at the end of his videos? Like, comment and let me know if you agree with me.
yeah,
Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know what you think.
yeah.
And well, I never bother to disagree because I'm like, okay, well,
You're in enemy territory. Just
this will not end well. I'm just asking to be dogpiled. But I definitely appreciate, you know, I appreciate the approach he takes. So I kind of like, in that way, I kind of like his channel. Um, but yeah, listening to all voices is an important exercise, and always remembering that we you know don't have it all. We're all works in progress. So am I gonna put am I gonna push freeze right now and say, yep, I got it all figured out and I'm 100% right, you know and this is what I'm going. No, I mean, I hope I grow, I hope I learn. um and so yeah, that's that.
yeah.
But so gosh, we haven't even so we've only barely like scratched the surface of of the Eucharist book.
We did only scratch the surface, and I was thinking that I might need to wrap up a little soon, for two reasons. First and foremost, I got to feed my cats. But then the second reason is, so Kyle Whittington popped into the chat to
Into this chat.
Kyle Whittington popped into this chat to say that he is, well, first of all, he called me a nerd. And then secondly, he said that he's going live on his channel responding to my video on Abraham and Isaac,
Oh
which,
wow.
and
Oh wow.
I did highlight the one, there's one section in here where he talks about,
Maybe we should. Can we just have fun with Abraham and Isaac for one little minute before? Maybe
yes,
that's our.
absolutely. I was going to say I wanted to bring up one more thing. And in fact,
Oh yeah, okay, bring it up.
No.
Yeah,
Let's go straight to the Abraham and Isaac thing. I think that's going to work better. And let me see if I can find the quote. I didn't highlight like a ton of stuff in here.
it was pretty.
I did
Early
find it. I did
on.
find it. So it's on page 51, the bottom of page 51. The part that I highlighted begins with this command of God, the command of God when he told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, seemed to place God in a contradiction to himself. This order must have prompted within Abraham not only a personal psychological crisis of the highest degree, but also, if I can express it this way, a theological crisis. In a supreme paradox, God wanted Abraham to ratify the covenant by a willingness to sacrifice the very condition for the possibility of the covenant. They're referring, so God promised Abraham a lot of offspring, finally gave him one offspring, and then tries to take it away from him, but says to him, like, hey, to ratify this covenant, we're going to take the thing that I gave you to ratify the. So, like, it's a contradiction there. It's a paradox.
And he uses the word paradox. I think on your video, I think my comment on your video that Kyle's speaking of, I think I used the word paradox.
I think you did too.
in my comment. And I also I wasn't thinking at all about Barron's. I wasn't even thinking about, even though I was reading the book, I wasn't thinking about the passage when I commented. But my comment on that video was essentially that one approach that I think we can take to that is the approach that Barron himself takes to the Gospels. Not his sole approach, but this idea of this exercise of reading the Gospels in sort of as a Zen koan. And Barron speaks about this in terms of the Gospels, where sometimes we just read them and we meditate on the paradox, and we use them as these devices to inspire our own meditation upon the mystery. But that was my gut reaction on the video you did. Oh gosh, and I can picture the fellow that you did the video with, but I can't remember.
His name is Adam.
Adam, and that was the second video you did with Adam.
Yeah, so I did a hour and a half long stream with Adam, because Adam's pretty similar to me. Adam is just Canadian Kevin, but he was kind of presenting in that hour and a half long stream the various reasons why he doesn't call himself Catholic anymore. And like me, he considers himself an agnostic. And so one of those things on that hour and a half long stream that we talked about was the Binding of Isaac. So we decided to make like a edited video about the Binding of Isaac specifically. And here's what I'll say with regard to what you just said about the Binding of Isaac. I'm on board. Like, really, honestly, I am. My contention with the Binding of Isaac is that we should be looking at that and thinking, like, thank God this is just a narrative, right? A myth. Because the only right action for, like, if we think about like morally what is right, I'm rather opinionated about this. And so I will argue that you should say no to God if he tells you to kill an innocent person.
So you would be Peter in Acts when God lets down the sheets saying, "Rise, kill and eat. Go eat the creeping things, eat the swine, eat all the unclean food." And you would be Peter saying, "No, no, God, I have never eaten an unclean thing ever. I will not disobey your command." That's what your answer would have been if you were Abraham.
Yeah.
So okay, so maybe let me share with you what my thoughts are on that episode. So I guess I would suspend judgment on was Abraham a historical figure.
Yeah.
So a book I read way back when, and again, I'm an old guy, so a book that was popular back in, I guess, the 80s and 90s, and I would have read it in the 90s, was a book by John Bright. John Bright's, I think it's A History of Israel. And John Bright was a Protestant, I guess, maybe not theologian, but scholar, Protestant scholar. So John Bright was a Protestant scholar. And he was someone who was fairly, I think of him as kind of being an evangelically friendly Protestant, but someone who was informed by the recent developments of scholarship. So all the recent developments in historical scholarship that happened, in the early 20th century, like he would be maybe a William Albright kind of guy,
Okay, yeah.
that kind of era, somebody coming out of that kind of era, which, I'm old enough to where that stuff was still kind of hip when, that was kind of hip when I was coming up. So even though I'm on the young side of that generation, but that was still, those were the guys we looked to. But the way Bright tackles the whole history of Israel is he goes back and he establishes, like, historically what was happening in the world at that time. And the argument he makes is, okay, would it make sense for there to be a guy like Abraham living at this time? And then he takes sort of this narrative turn on it and saying, okay, we know that oftentimes when we speak of historically, that we use a person to stand in for a whole movement of
Yeah.
history,
Hmm.
right? So it's possible, according to Bright, that, you know would it have been natural for a guy like Abraham to exist at that time? Sure. But would it be natural for us to speak about a whole movement of history with this one stand-in symbolic figure, such as, you know, this narrative Abraham? So I come at that then kind of, with that similar thinking, saying, okay, I'm going to suspend judgment on, was Abraham a literal historical figure? Maybe, maybe not. Um, but are, is he representing something that, probably, I'm in the real, like, ground zero for the Canadian smoke right now.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so I
Jeez.
think, and I don't know that I don't know that's what's
It's
penetrating my.
it's by me now down in Kentucky. It's
Yeah, well,
so
I'm in like the hot.
okay.
I'm in like the worst. You
Uh,
can see it's like foggy outside and it
okay.
smells like burning wood.
That's so
But
weird.
but anyway, so so I look at that Abraham narrative saying, okay, we can at least read it as a narrative of something that was going on. So, one thing I look at in the narrative, um, is the whole idea of the human sacrifice element. And, in the short narrative as it's presented to us, it is presented as a very simple narrative. This is just a
Yeah.
story, like okay, like what Barron said about the Christmas thing in Raymond Brown, right? Like, are we are we wrong to, or are we misguided if we read the Christmas, this innocent child's version of a Christmas story? Well, do we rob ourselves if we limit ourselves to reading the Abraham, the Binding of Isaac narrative as just that's all it was? It was this, like, that is the sum total of it, this little story that's communicated to us in the narrative. Well, we're probably misguided if we read anything in the Bible that way. So, one thing I think we need to take into account is the very reality of human sacrifice in that world. Okay, so while we might say, okay, it's problematic for our view of the Yahweh of Israel to ask Abraham to do this, heinous thing, which was even built in. The heinous nature of the request is even part of the. I mean, that
Yes,
makes the
it
story.
is.
That's
Yep,
baked. It's
it
it's not
is.
like it's not like it's not like, oh, these guys were just so naive and primitive that, oh, okay, you want me to make my son a human sacrifice? Okay,
Yes.
no, that's baked into the story. Like
100%.
it's meant to scandalize,
Yep.
and that's where what my response to that video is, okay, there is a absolute paradox, but part of the one of the points of the story is that's the point of the story. But now, so let's say, okay, so let's qualify it as a narrative, and then let's step back into a world where human sacrifice was practiced, and then maybe we want to broaden our reading of the narrative to look at it as actually a condemnation of human sacrifice. Maybe a underlying strand that we don't draw out of the narrative as much as we should, is that the very narrative itself, it is a condemnation of human sacrifice, because at the end, it is. I mean, the angel of the Lord comes down and says, "Don't do it."
Yeah.
Like, what are you like? Don't do it.
Yeah. And so I'm 100% on board with everything that you said, and I do think that one of the points of that story was a condemnation of human sacrifice, and none of that was really my main contention in the video. I think that my main contention of the video was that the way that the other biblical, so Genesis itself, and then also New Testament texts, seem to be praising Abraham for his willingness to obey God, even when God is, apparently asking him to do something, morally objectionable.
So, right. And so the way I would read the Hebrews, the praising of Abraham in Hebrews is, and I would read what they are praising him is, and I think it even says it in Hebrews, that God was so powerful that even Abraham faith that God could even bring his son back, restore his son to life. Okay, so so I guess I read it as he was being praised for his faith in the abilities, his utter faith in God, but maybe not as much. He was not being praised for the act of human sacrifice. Okay, it was more the faith element, and I guess we obviously that can be greatly, and it is. I mean, that's been a hot topic ever since Kant spoke of the moral dilemma that created, and then Kierkegaard has his own famous take on the story. But but now just to tie this into the Eucharist, and maybe if we can land the plane here.
Let's do it. Coming down.
But so we have an ancient world where they say, the people, the scholars say, human sacrifice is probably as old as humanity. People speak of it being, it goes back pretty far. This impulse to sacrifice, a minimum of 5,000 years, and then some people even take it back into, like ancient, like Stone Age, paleo. I'm handicapped in my scientific jargon, but like the Stone Age Europe, there's people that would argue that there's evidence of it going back like far.
Yeah.
But as is the religious impulse, it goes along with burying of the dead. When mankind as a species started burying their dead, having religious trinkets, sacrificing humans. And so human sacrifice was a reality of the broader religious conscience of the whole human race. Okay, so it's virtually ubiquitous in the ancient world. So we get to the Abraham story, and one of the really profound things, one of the things we can maybe congratulate, one of the things we can applaud in the Jewish religion, or the Israelite, the ancient Israelite religion, is that they did dispense with human sacrifice
Yeah.
and um and forbid it. But they didn't just like completely do away with it. They replaced it, and they replaced it with animal sacrifice. And just as a side note, I think human sacrifice was only outlawed in the Roman Empire, I think in like the 70s BC, like maybe like less than 100 years before Christ, when Rome fought, so that's the world that,
Yeah.
okay, so Abraham's way back. And and in this narrative tradition, there's like, yeah, no more human sacrifice. If we can read the Binding of Isaac with that thread, like, yeah, no more human sacrifice. And then certainly it's made explicit in the Levitical laws,
Yeah.
post Sinai. Then it's like, yeah, no human sacrifice. Um, but then it introduces animal sacrifice. But now, even in that even in that tradition, the pre-Christian tradition, in the prophets, already God is even beginning to drop these little hints that, yeah, even this whole all this bloody sacrificing bulls and goats thing is, that's I'm not into that either. That's not the point of it either. And finally, you know, this prophecy, as it were, or this insight, or this impulse, as we might say, of the oh, my friend Roland, oh, this is my good friend, all my IG buddies are popping in here tonight. Hey, Roland's
Just
my big spamming buddy on Instagram. Roland takes absolute delight in spamming me all day long with his favorite TikTok videos, and that's Roland. Um, but so glad to see Roland popping in here. Um, but so I guess I'm creating this this arc of history narrative where, you know ancient humanity, big into human sacrifice.
mm-hmm.
Then we enter this so-called, I guess we would call it, the axial age, where a more a more enlightened religious impulse now is saying, yeah, well, yeah, enough with the human sacrifice, but we still have this deep um seated feeling within our collective conscience that something needs to be atoned for. Okay, and this is not a Christian idea specifically, or a you know Jewish idea, or an Islamic idea. It's a human. It's a human
For
idea
sure.
that there has been some rupture with the proper order of things. And so way back, our answer to that, one answer we had to that, was human sacrifice. We modified that, and it became animal sacrifice. And indeed, animal sacrifices was going on up and through the time of Christ. And, certainly in the Roman Empire, there was still animal sacrifice going on. But then, in the fullness of time, as it says in Hebrews, you know, the the Christ comes on the scene. Jesus of Nazareth comes on the scene, and becomes for all the world the once for all sacrifice. And so I see in the Jesus sacrifice now, I see I see this similar I see this similar parallelism with the Abraham Isaac thing. So just as with Abraham and Isaac, and this is one of my very quirky, and this is a hot take, Daniel original quirky take. Okay. So just as with the Abraham, the binding of Isaac narrative, there is this fearful proposition made. You must sacrifice your only son. And Abraham's like, oh wow. Okay. All right. And so in the narrative he carries through with it. And then, but how does it play out? This angel intervenes and says, yeah, no, 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 no. What we mean is you must sacrifice this ram. That's what happens. Okay. That's what we really want you to do here. Now, in the New Testament narratives, I see a similar dynamic playing out. So the most scandalous passage in the Gospel of John, John 6, okay? Jesus comes about and says to the the people who were listening to him, I think the Pharisees were there, and this famous scandalous passage of John 6. You must eat my flesh and drink my blood. And they ask him, right? They ask him, oh, surely you can't ask us to eat, this is an unclean thing. I mean, this is not even, we can't even drink the blood of the sacrifices where, that God tells us to make, right? The thing that Jesus is asking them to do, it would be scandalous to be drinking any blood. We're like team not drinking blood here, okay? And the Pharisees are absolutely scandalized by this. Jesus, I am the bread of life, and you must eat and drink my blood. Eat my flesh, drink my blood. And so they press him on this. This is the famous thing. We've all heard this presentation 100 times, but surely you don't mean we must eat your flesh and drink your blood, right, Jesus? And he says, no, he doubles down. He doesn't say, oh no, I'm speaking, I'm the metaphorical bread of life. And, no, he's like, no, you got to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And they all desert him, except for his close circle of disciples. And they say, even they're like, Jesus, we can't, like, you're making this hard for us here. And, he says, well, okay, if you want to leave me, you can leave. You can all get off the train right now, because I'm do what you do. If you got to leave me, will you also leave me? And then they did make the famous statement of faith. Lord, where shall we go? So we have this.
Sorry, Daniel, I hate to interrupt. My poor cats are screaming at the door right now. I'm gonna have to go feed them in a minute. Do you want to kind of like get in like a closing statement if you can?
Yeah. So just leading up to this, okay. So in the in Jesus' ministry, he presents this himself. He presents this great dilemma of, okay, you're going to be eating my flesh and drinking my blood, and he kind of says, like, no, I'm being literal here. I'm kind of being literal. And then at the Last Supper, he takes the bread, presents it to the disciples, and says, this, take, eat. This is my body. And I read that almost with the same relief that I see Abraham having. Like, you must sacrifice your son. And he's like, okay, I don't get what you're getting at here, but all right. And then there's this great fulfillment. Oh no, it's a ram. And then we have this same parallelism with, yeah, you're going to be eating my flesh and drinking my blood. Yeah, here we have bread and wine. Now we have to, we'll have to do a part 2.
Yes.
To discuss how this is truly the body and blood of Christ, And there's like a ton that can be said about that. Um, and we can maybe come back to that. So
I think that's awesome because we really did only scratch the surface of the Eucharist book. Even, as short of a book as it is,
we barely even, we should do I guess we should do a part two.
let's do it.
But,
Let's do a part 2.
I'd love to dive deeply in. I mean, so I guess the only thing to say then is read the book.
Yes.
Get the book.
And I'll
or
hold
get
up
the
my
new
copy
book,
too.
Yeah. Or the new book, the new body. What's his new book that he's got? The Body and Blood.
Something like that.
Anyway, the new book he's peddling. I shouldn't say peddling. The new book he's promoting, although with the number of emails I'm bombarded with from the good bishop. But this new book, This Is My Body, This Is My Blood, or whatever it's called. It's essentially the 3 critical inner chapters. It's literally the 3 primary chapters of the Eucharist book. And if you want an audio presentation of the essential message, any one of Barron's like hour-plus talks on the Eucharist that he's done. I think his most famous talk ever, the one that he says is like his main viral video, which is his talk on the Eucharist. It's pretty much his spoken rendition of the book.
Cool.
So I recommend, I'm just a raving, lunatic who loves the church here, but you won't do wrong reading Barron's books on the Eucharist and This Is My Body. So that's about what I have to say about that. And
I think that's a perfect place to end things until
alrighty.
part 2.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'm going to go feed my cats. This has been Kevin and Daniel on Conversations with Catholics. And until next time.